I suppose through having a dad who was a successful director, it made me think, because he's my dad, it's like, well, if he can do it, it can't be that difficult, So I kind of realized that if I was going to do it, if I was going to make films, I'd want to be a director. And then off the back of that, I started to write. I actually started to write fairly late because I'm dyslexic. And that wasn't so easy for me. I then realized if you really want to direct something that you want to direct, maybe if you write it, that might help you,
Hey everyone, I'm Billy and welcome back to Half the Picture. Our guest this episode is writer-director James Marquand, whose new World War II thriller The Partisan is out in cinemas today. The Partisan details the life and wartime exploits of Krystyna Skarbek, the real-life spy who escaped Nazi-occupied Europe and began fighting for the British against the Axis. She's now remembered as Churchill's favourite spy and was reportedly a big influence on Ian Fleming when he was writing the James Bond novels. Coming up, me and James dive deep into the making of the movie, including what it was like working with the amazing cast, which happens to include one of my all-time favourite actors, Malcolm McDowell, and also we talked a bit about his experience working with his dad on his films, which just so happens to include a little-known film called Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Maybe you've heard of it. You've got all that and more to look forward to. So without further ado, let's roll on my chat with James Marquand. Enjoy. Hi James, welcome to Half the Picture. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Live from my living room, as you can see.
Live from my dining room.
Ah, very exciting. Cool. Well, let's just go straight into it then, I guess. So the story of behind your film, The Partisan, which is the story of Krystyna Skarbek, is quite an extraordinary story. I mean, if you dig into it, I mean, it's one of those stories that I guess lends credence to the phrase "truth is stranger than fiction" in a lot of ways. I mean, the stuff that she accomplished during the war as sort of Churchill's favorite spy is pretty amazing. And I guess to kick off with, I just wanted to ask you, when did you first encounter her story, and at what point did you realize, oh, I want to make this into a film?
Yeah, it was interesting actually. I mean, I knew about her from my childhood. I had a Jewish grandmother who was she kind of, when I was a kid, I was into James Bond. Not that I still am, I suppose, in a kind of retro way. She wasn't so into James Bond, and she said, I can tell you who the real James Bond is. And she told me about Krystyna Skarbek, which was, I'm like, whatever, 9 years old or something. And I remember thinking it was interesting, but this is obviously pre the internet and being able to find all this information out, and she explained to me about the female spies in World War II and all this kind of stuff. So I did know about her, but actually to make this film, I was approached by the producers. I'd been writing another script. Well, I'd written another script that they were interested in making. And then, as happens with producers, I think money came in for this one. They were Polish British producers, so they knew about her. That the Polish guys knew about her through that. So they sort of approached me to write it. Somebody else was going to direct it. And when they said, I'm like, they were like, it's a Polish British World War II thing. Okay, great. And when they said it was her, I was like, oh wow, okay, yeah, no, I'd definitely be interested in doing that. So it started that way, and then I basically was writing for this other director, and following, I suppose, I was doing most of the research, lots of conversations back and forth, but I was kind of writing his version, I suppose. And then as time went on, COVID hit. He ended up not being able to do the film, by which point we had a fairly advanced draft, and the producers asked me whether I would direct it. So I said yes, but I'd like to rewrite it because I see things a little bit different if I'm going to direct it. So they agreed to that. I kind of pitched them what I'd like to change, which was to make her a darker character, more flawed, and focus on that, more than the kind of romantic heroism kind of angle. And surprise, surprise, they agreed, and they thought that was a good idea too. So that's kind of how I got the gig. That was your question, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's interesting because Krystyna Skarbek, she was doing so much work, for the British and for the Allies during the war, year spanning really the whole breadth of it, years. I mean, when you were writing that script for the previous director, and then you came on board, like, what were the factors in you deciding, okay, we'll focus on like these specific events? Because like really, if you dive into her story, there's so much that covers so much. She was in so many different territories across the duration of the war.
We had drafts where it started in Egypt and you know all over the place, and then we had other ideas where we felt like we just had to focus on one aspect of her story. um you know but then in the end, I think, I mean, what we finally have done is we it's sort of act one is a origin story, I suppose. This you know sort of crazy danger freak lady who is basically trying to get back, who's out of Poland, and she's trying to get back in because she wants to rescue her mother, which is actually, even though this is a dramatic interpretation, is true. That was her mission.
And then her mother didn't want to go, didn't she? Her mother didn't want to leave Poland.
No, and that's true as well. We started to realize that it is if you make it a character study more than a kind of spy film, you obviously have to deal with the spy stuff, which is really, um, complicated because it was so basic. They had no technology really, a radio, and that's about it, which often didn't work. So their methods were quite laborious and complicated. But we kind of realized if we can focus on her character, and then all the supporting characters as well, and try and understand motivations of the people, we can hopefully come up with something more interesting than just a kind of romantic hero, classic war film, I suppose. So do something a little bit different with the material. So what we ended up doing was we have her origin story, which basically shapes her and motivates her for what she is to become, and then acts 2 and 3 are her, like, so, yeah. Act 1 is her first mission that shapes her. Acts 2 and 3 is her last mission that kind of, I suppose, makes her sort of fulfill her destiny. At the risk of sounding like a Marvel movie, it's not a Marvel movie at all.
For sure. I mean, something that you said there about how her sort of exploits and like her character, talking about her character and trying to make it a little bit sort of a bit different from the sort of the usual formula of these kinds of stories and these kinds of films. I mean, when you diving into her story, I mean, it reminded me of so many of those great sort of wartime heroes, I guess, that we've seen on screen and also not the ones that aren't as celebrated on screen. And the sort of audacity that they have in terms of just like basically essentially sort of marching into the lion's den and facing down, in this case, the Axis, the Nazis, and I mean, which she did many times, and basically like staring them in the face and making demands and bluffing and bullshitting and all this, and kind of basically all the interest of espionage and saving lives. And it reminded me, for a lot of those heroic stories we hear as well, of people like, even people like Oscar Schindler, basically his audacity is kind of a shield. And it kind of is what keeps him alive and keeps it makes him a success in his mission, saving lives. A similar humanitarian mission, if you want to say that.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking, like, I was wanted to ask, like, when you were making this film, obviously you just said you wanted to make it a bit. You didn't want to just go down the formulaic route that we've seen before, but also like what films and what stories and takes on this material were in the back of your mind when you were making this.
That is an interesting question. I think it was more the route I took was more based upon reading a huge amount about her and finding that it just didn't add up. If you study it and you look at all the various things that have been written, her dark side is often sort of made into comedy, and I started to realize, I did some research not just about her, but then about people who have whatever that quality is to go and do these crazy, dangerous things. I suppose it is like that danger freak, that need to risk yourself, be a skydiver or whatever it is. And then she definitely had that personality. you have to have a dark side to be able to, this is obviously taking that even further by kind of, as you say, going into the lion's den completely. And that kind of trying to understand that for myself personally, what I'm interested in as characters, maybe I was forcing it because that's the kind of character I'm interested in. I suppose more than a hero, an anti-hero interests me a lot more. And then just putting the pieces together of her life, as you mentioned, her mother is a really important character in the film. But actually, if you read her history, her mum is kind of dismissed. She doesn't really get much attention. Her dad is a much more colorful character. He's this kind of philandering playboy who blew all the money, and was a kind of larger than life person. The mum was just sort of fairly nondescript, a daughter of a Jewish banker with some money that helped the dad. That's how it's depicted. But I started to just think about this thing. She goes to rescue her mom. By the way, they didn't get on. It's funny because Agatha Kulesha, the actress who plays the mom, when we were discussing how this works, because she was kind of like, it's a very cruel scene the way they talk to each other, and it's like they love each other but they don't like each other. Exactly. That's your note when you think about how this works. Yeah. Obviously, I think Krystyna had always dismissed her mother as being this person who's getting pushed around by the dad and never stuck up for herself and all that kind of stuff. But what she realizes when she goes to rescue her is that her mother is not. Her mother is actually very strong, and is stoic. And in her little way is also fighting against, oppression. She's teaching these classes in secret to kids. And she's absolutely, as a Jewish woman in the middle of Warsaw, she's completely risking her life in doing it, but she's not going to leave. And that's true. That really happened. So that ends up becoming, in our story, that becomes Krystyna's motivation for going forward with what she does. And I suppose in a way, the character study aspect of our story is her learning to understand who she is. Who are you is a question that's asked throughout the film by various people, various fascists who are trying to cross-question her, and she's got her fake papers and what have you. And what she realized, she's trying to learn herself what the answer to that question is. Is she a good person? Is she a bad person? Is she doing it because she's a hero and she's trying to help? Or is she doing it just because she loves the thrill of it? I hope that at least explains that I suppose the story is led by the motivation of Krystyna, and that's how it works.
For sure. Yeah, you mentioned the word anti-hero there, which I think is interesting because I was thinking about the cast that you've got for this film, which is a pretty extraordinary cast. I mean, you've got such great people as Ingvar. So I won't have a stab at pronouncing his Sigurdsson. Yeah, he's done some incredible work, and obviously Malcolm McDowell, who's just brilliant. I mean, one of the great cinematic anti-heroes, played so many of those characters. I mean, I just wanted to ask, what was your experience working with the cast on this? Because obviously, with McDowell, I've met McDowell, and it is such a great presence, brilliant actor, but also an incredible raconteur, and he's a lot of fun kind of to be around. I mean, what was your experience like working with him and the rest of the cast?
Yeah, I mean, he was a real coup. He's hilarious. So you met him.
Yeah,
he does. I mean, he has so many stories. I mean, I love him. We're great friends. I've actually done another film with him, which we're just editing now. It was a huge boost to the film to get him, for everybody, obviously for anybody acting with him, but also for all the crew too, because he just brings so much energy and hilarity. I mean, it's ridiculous. He's not a method actor, Never seen anybody who could switch it on and off like he can. It's just, I think probably his greatest passion is following Liverpool Football Club, which may be one of the reasons why we also first hit it off pretty well. But he was just, it was absolute icing on the cake, and also interestingly very well thought after in Poland, where Clockwork Orange was a huge film when it came out during communist times. It was like a subversive hidden film that they'd have to watch on private screenings and things like that. it was mega getting him. And like Ingvar, I've done a few things with him. He's a mate. I managed to get some, some friends, and also Steve Waddington, who plays in one of the scenes with Malcolm as the kind of horrible interrogator. I've done stuff with him before, and then we also had some amazing Polish actors who were just incredible to work with. So we really did try to work hard on getting the right cast who kind of bought into this idea of giving all of these kind of central characters a backstory. Even if you don't see all of the backstory, that you feel that they're not just there to kind of look pretty. There's more to it.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's funny because you mentioned like Malcolm's like presence in the in Europe. I mean, like because Clockwork Orange, but also like Oh Lucky Man, all those films, were big in Russia and like Eastern Europe. He's and Evelenko as well. I mean, he's got a real sort of. I think he's got a real pocket of like of people who love him over there and really support his work. And obviously, of course, you're working with Morgane Polanski as Krystyna. I mean, what was that like as well, bringing her in?
It was amazing. It was hard to think who to play her. It was also made more complicated by having to do the film in English. What all of us wanted originally was to just have subtitles and have people talk their language, but for commercial reasons, that was just laughed about, as an idea. So finding Morgane off the back of the Vikings, where she plays in a way slightly. I mean, there's some similarities. That her character in Viking is probably less of a woman of action than Krystyna, but someone who has to navigate their way through, a very difficult situation that if they get wrong, they're going to get killed. And I thought she was great in that. I personally, I kind of lost the track of Vikings by the time she came into it, but then seeing her in it kind of got me back into the season that she was in again. You combine that with her background, with a French mom and a Polish dad, and her dad's experience in the war, and she just had her own, dangerous, edgy quality to her. That meant she was the perfect person to play the part. It was also like incredibly physically and mentally demanding playing that part, because she's in every scene. It follows her journey. So it was like a real feat of physical and mental endurance, to play that part. Every scene she's in, and we had a very packed schedule. It was like an absolute ultra marathon for her,
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, like, so that's it. I mean, she's the backbone of the movie. She carries the movie on her back. So yeah, I mean, I can imagine that's demanding. And also, I guess, like you say, having grown up with those stories of Poland and the war, and like the Warsaw and the Jewish ghetto and all those experiences must have only informed what she was doing, and how you guys communicated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about she's also a movie maker herself. So, we collaborated a lot on what we were doing, trying to figure out how she would behave in, this situation or that. Obviously, I wrote the script, but then she would say something about a scene, but does it make sense that blah, blah, blah? And it would be like, oh, I see what you mean. So there was a lot of collaboration between us. Really good. Yeah.
Something that I've been curious to ask you about is because my understanding of you as a filmmaker and your background and where you come from in terms of filmmaking is like, so I believe you started in storyboarding and then moved into editing and then moved into directing. And as someone who did editing, I mean, I studied editing at university, and so I've always had a sort of keen interest in the post-production sort of process.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, so, and you obviously, in storyboarding is an integral part of pre-production, and then you say you've worked in kind of every single annal and like area of filmmaking. I mean, even in the run-up to directing. I mean, how do you think that's informed you as a director, like having that understanding of editing and then visualizing?
Well, I mean, I studied fine art at art school. The most useless degree. So I had an art background, and I still paint and draw and what have you. So I mean, I storyboard everything, and I always have. I found that's my way, because it takes a bit of time. It's my way to think about how I'm going to shoot the scene. So that just as a method really works for me. And then being a a bit of a lucky bugger, I had the opportunity to be a trainee editor on my dad's last film, which ended up not being so lucky. But I spent every summer watching him direct. I always loved films. I didn't particularly think I was going to be a director, having seen the other side of the life of being a director, because it's there's a lot of reasons why something that involves that many people, that much money, can be pretty complicated and difficult. And but I suppose I went from storyboarding to being a trainee editor on his last film, which was a massive disaster, and he actually died before the film came out, which taught me some difficult lessons as well about the business and what really goes on the ruthless business side of things. But I guess I then didn't have anything to do with film for quite a few years. Having been a huge film buff, I even stopped watching films, and I just focused on my art. And it was actually a friend of mine who got in touch with me and written a script and said, "We have a read of it. I know you've read lots of scripts and stuff." And he kind of reinvigorated me. I got back into it through that, and ended up. I was living in Liverpool at the time, and I ended up. This guy and I wrote a script together, a short film script, and Alan Bleasdale, who some people may remember, amazing writer from Liverpool, read it and called me up and said, "This is great. I want to help you make it." And he got us the money, and we made this short film, and kind of off I went again. So it was sort of weird. It was like, I kind of got lucky, I suppose, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. I don't think I was the obviously ambitious, person with a master plan. It just kind of weird things fell into place, and I followed it, And since that time, there's been other times where I thought, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. It's a pain in the ass, But then, something comes off again, and off you go. I suppose it's a bit of a drug,
It's funny how I think a lot of filmmakers, you hear a lot of different stories of filmmakers who, it sounds like that story you just told is very similar to a lot of stories I thought people kind of fall into directing, and which is very interesting. Like people like Alex Garland, they start in one area, then they move into another, then they're like, and then there was no master plan, it just happened. But
I mean, I have to say, I think my time as a editor was one film, most of the time syncing film and rewinding it, back in the old days, loading Steambecks. I mean, I suppose through having a dad who was a successful director, it made me think, because he's my dad, it's like, well, if he can do it, it can't be that difficult, So I kind of realized that if I was going to do it, if I was going to make films, I'd want to be a director. And then off the back of that, I started to write. I actually started to write fairly late because I'm dyslexic. And that wasn't so easy for me. I then realized if you really want to direct something that you want to direct, maybe if you write it, that might help you, So that's come a bit later. But I think possibly through having confidence of seeing that my dad did it, made me just think, well, really, I just want to direct. And to be honest, my first film, I blagged it a lot, but I found out small things that I liked, and I knew how I wanted to do it. And of course, because I could storyboard, I storyboarded everything. I had the whole thing like a comic book, you know. And then you realize when you're doing it, things change and things adapt. But if you've got this like blueprint you can hang on to, security blanket, then it's okay to kind of divert in some other direction.
But this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And I can't wait for the film to come out. I can't wait to see it.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks a lot.